Ah, yes, 2015. The year that gave us this.
Turn it off!
Turn off your phone!
Turn off the flash, you fucking moron!
Star Wars The Force Awakens. You know, I grew up with Star Wars. I mean, I had all the toys, I had the Lego video games. It really became an integral part of my DNA for the latter half of my childhood. And stepping away from movies in general, the one thing that could get my ass back into the theater was a new Star Wars movie, which of course was all the rage, considering the fact that we thought we may never get any of these movies ever again. And of course, I mean, we see where we are 10 years later, but that's a whole other discussion for another time. But The Force Awakens was essentially what kickstarted my love for movies, which I really didn't care that much for at all, if you can believe that. And going through the Star Wars movies again and looking up what people had to say about these movies online was really when I started to develop a more critical way of looking at film and becoming more interested. So this movie really is the reason I am here today, doing what I am doing. And while I didn't get to see a lot of the movies that came out in 2015 when they did release, it was essentially the year that made me fall in love with movies, when I really started to pay attention to things. And so I figured 10 years onwards, here I am, just over 1,000 subscribers, which is something I never thought that would happen, all this time ago when I started getting into it. I figured, why not look back at the 10 best films of that year, the ones that I would now consider to be classics and potentially what would have made my list if I did one that year. And now, before I get into my honorable mentions and my list of the best movies of 2015, I want to talk about my 5 favorite performances from that year. So let's kick off the list at number 5 with Jason Segel in The End of the Tour. Never would I have imagined me saying that Jason Segel should have been nominated for an Academy Award, but that is exactly how I feel about his portrayal of the late author David Foster Wallace in this deeply fascinating portrait of a tortured artist. He is so captivating in not only capturing the essence and mannerisms of David Foster Wallace, but also the complexities of his personality, the razor-sharp wit, the deep insight, but also the deep insecurity that comes along with being who he is and where he is at in his particular stage in life. It really is such a quietly captivating performance from Jason Segel, and I'm really surprised that he didn't get more awards consideration for it. But between his chemistry with Jesse Eisenberg, as well as his rich comprehension and portrayal of David Foster Wallace, I think that this is an absolute must-see and really solidifies Jason Segel as a legitimately great dramatic actor. And coming in at number 4, I have Leonardo DiCaprio in The Revenant. I know, not everybody is as huge on this performance, but for one, I thought it would feel a little bit strange to put Jason Segel above Leonardo DiCaprio in his Oscar-winning role. And secondly, I do feel, even though the supporting categories were kind of crazy at the Oscars that year, we might get into that, I do feel like the one thing that they got right were the 2 lead acting categories. And after a string of incredible Oscar-nominated performances in a career as legendary as some of the greatest actors to ever do it, Leonardo DiCaprio fully commits himself to this grueling role and really throws himself into the carcass of a horse, into the cold of the bitter winter, and conveys so much pain, anguish, and hatred throughout his quest for revenge in Alejandro Iñárritu's movie without hardly saying a word. I mean, he's kind of incapacitated for a good amount of this film, but still, you cannot take your eyes off of what he is doing on the screen. And I really think that the final moments of this film and his performance really solidify this Oscar win, if not by just a hair. This, to me, is still one of the defining performances of Leonardo DiCaprio's career, and I'm glad that he finally won his Oscar for this role in particular. Okay, now it's time to talk about the Best Supporting Actor race that year at the Oscars. You got Christian Bale, you got Tom Hardy, you got Mark Ruffalo, of course, you have Sylvester Stallone and Mark Rylance. Now, we could argue all day about who should have won. I have a lot of thoughts on that Mark Rylance win, but the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb, especially with Rylance winning the Oscar, is who is absent in this category, and that is Paul Dano in Love and Mercy. But also, I would argue, John Cusack as well. Now, I don't usually combine performances for an entry on this list, but I have to include both Paul Dano and John Cusack's dual portrayals as Brian Wilson. Of course, Paul Dano earlier in the 1960s during the recording of the seminal Beach Boys album Pet Sounds, and John Cusack later in life under the conservatorship of Eugene Landy. Now, even though I'd say Paul Dano, who completely disappears into the role of Brian Wilson, who I think deserved to win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor that year, not bad for the worst actor in the entirety of SAG, I think John Cusack gives his career best performance here as the older Brian Wilson. Of course, he does not quite look like the legendary music icon, but he completely captures him in the way that he moves. The mannerisms are so spot on in the internal struggle of all the mental illness that Brian was dealing with at that time under the control of Eugene Landy, played brilliantly by Paul Giamatti. This really is such a great two-hander of a performance of playing one singular person, and I just think that this is such a great tribute to everything that Brian Wilson was, the genius, the demons, everything that made him Brian Wilson, and arguably, I say, the greatest pop composer of the 20th century. This is such a beautiful tribute to one of the most brilliant musicians of the modern day, and it's so bittersweet and also beautiful revisiting this after both the deaths of Brian and his wife, Melinda. It is such a beautiful tribute to their love and also the resilience of Brian Wilson as a human being, as an artist who endures to this very day, and someone that we will never forget. And at number 2, I have Nina Hoss in Christian Petzold's Phoenix, a performance of which should have been nominated for Best Actress, but for some reason I don't even know if the movie was eligible to be nominated. But regardless, she plays a Auschwitz survivor who undergoes facial reconstruction surgery and tries to find out if her husband had betrayed her during the war. This is such a difficult performance to pull off, but Nina Hoss says so much with just a single glance. She conveys so much history in her eyes, and also the fact that she has to essentially hide who she is from her former love of her life, but also convey to the audience both the unresolved love and pain that she has for this man. And the way that this performance all comes together by the very end of the film is nothing less than stunning. I absolutely love Nina Hoss in this film, and I think she is the reason that this film is as memorable as it is. And for my favorite performance in the movies from 2015, as it should be, is no surprise to anybody, Brie Larson's Oscar-winning turn in Room. This has to be one of the most grounded, lived-in performances that I have seen in the movies in quite some time. She is so engaging and so authentic right from the beginning of this film. The way that she gives her unconditional love over to her son, and how you see the extent of her maternal and protective instincts kick in throughout the course of this movie, making her feel so empathetic, but also in the way that she portrays the trauma that she has gone through in enduring such tragic circumstances that she has been placed under. It's one of those performances where you see the wheels spinning the entire runtime, and I mean that as the highest of compliments, because this is such a devastating, emotional, spellbinding, and dare I say, iconic performance. For all those who've gotten online throughout the years and have said that Brie Larson is not talented at all, you obviously have never seen the masterclass in acting that is her performance in Room. And of course, we've gotten to the part of the video where I bring up my honorable mentions for the best films of 2015. So without further ado, here they are: 99 Homes, The Big Short, Bone Tomahawk, Carol, The End of the Tour, Ex Machina, The Hateful Eight, Kingsman: The Secret Service, Love and Mercy, Mad Max Fury Road, Phoenix, The Revenant, Sicario, Taxi, What Happened Miss Simone, What We Do in the Shadows, and yes, of course, Star Wars The Force Awakens. Couldn't go without putting that one on the list, just for good old time's sake. But those are my honorable mentions for the best films of 2015. So let's not waste any more time than we already have and get into my top 10 choices of the year, starting with number 10. Now, if there was one trend in the movies in 2015 that wasn't made obvious enough already, it was the revival of long dormant franchises. And as much as I do still love Star Wars The Force Awakens to some degree, and especially Mad Max Fury Road, my favorite of the bunch had to be Ryan Coogler's Creed, which I would have said was his best film up until Sinners, and I'm sure we'll get into that when I talk about my favorite films of 2025. But who would have thought that Irvin Winkler and Robert Chardoff would revive the Rocky franchise, take what I consider to be the weakest of the series, and spin it off into one of the most compelling sequels and sport dramas in recent memory? That was exactly what happened when they brought in Coogler to direct and Michael B. Jordan to star in the story of Adonis Johnson, the illegitimate son of the legendary Apollo Creed. What makes Creed stand out from the other films in the Rocky series is not only Coogler's assured and breathtaking direction, especially during that one-take fight sequence, which I still think is one of the best things that he's ever done, but the baggage that Donnie carries and has to overcome is really what cements the story and perfectly mirrors the turmoil that Rocky is experiencing in this entry, featuring an Oscar-nominated Sylvester Stallone in his best portrayal of the heavyweight champion since the original film, and quite honestly, probably his finest performance after that. Although the formula is the same, the new approach to the story and the collective history of the previous films give this character-driven drama the strength to punch above its weight and stand beside Rocky as the best film in the franchise, spawning its own successful series in the process. And now, that is going to take us to number 9.
Commandos! Dead the commandos! Tiger Mafia! Super Kicker! What's happening? Around!
Okay, here we go. At number 9, I have Who Killed Captain Alex, directed by Isaac Nabwana, which technically came out in Uganda in 2010, but didn't hit the recesses of the internet until 2015, so I'm counting it as such. And look, I get that this movie has a completely nonsensical and incoherent storyline, poor lighting, sloppy editing, and some of the worst visual effects known to man. This film should be completely against everything I stand for when it comes to making a so-called great film. And you're thinking, Nathaniel, how could you put this above Mad Max Fury Road? But let me explain. Somehow, on an $85 budget, this Ugandan village came together and delivered one of the most entertaining, quotable, gut-busting, batshit action movies ever made, with some high-octane kung fu choreography and hilarious ad-libs from VJ Emmy on the mic is icing on the cake. And honestly, I feel like if this film was released in its original, now lost version, I honestly don't think it would be anything without these ad-libs. I mean, just for these lines alone.
This is serious! Everybody in Uganda knows Kung Fu! He does not need wings to fly. Bruce, you! Watch this!
And the fact that he constantly has to remind us that we're in a movie every 10 minutes.
The movie's on! The movie's on! The movie's on! Move it!
It just adds to the absolute hilarity of this film. And the fact that they are in on the joke. It's not like they are unaware of what they're doing. That's precisely why this film works so well. And I think because of that, I don't even think that this can be considered so bad it's good. It's really what filmmaking is all about. Using your wildest imagination to create something that completely understands what it is and who it's made for, and defying the odds by making the film you want to make despite the limitations that might prevent you from doing so. Isaac Nabwana wanted to make the first Ugandan action-packed movie for his village, and he and the village of Kampala succeeded with flying colors. And just recently, I ordered a copy of this DVD from Wakaliwood, and it is just one of the most amazing purchases I have made in such a long time. So I really do want to thank Isaac Nabwana and company for that, and for what they accomplished. I find Who Killed Captain Alex to be one of the most inspiring movies ever made, and I cannot wait to see the sequel whenever that is finally finished over in Wakaliwood. And with that out of the way, that is going to take us to number 8.
What is it to be human? What is it to ache? What is it to be alive?
Now, I think I can say for many that 2015 might as well have been one of the all-time great years in animation, maybe the greatest year in history for the animated film medium, especially the nominees in the Best animated feature category that year, which, trust me, we'll get into. But the first one I wanted to talk about, coming in at number 8, is Anomalisa from Duke Johnson and, of course, Charlie Kaufman. In utilizing the art of stop-motion animation, Charlie Kaufman, along with the help of Johnson, is able to express his wildest ideas in a way that only that specific medium can express. Anomalisa is surreal, existential, darkly offbeat in its hilarity, and ultimately both bittersweet and tragic in portraying this man's middle-life crisis and eventual realization about the delusions that plague him and his disaffected nature. By the virtue of Anomalisa's unconventional approach to storytelling, the eventual revelation of how the puzzle pieces of this labyrinthine narrative fall into place doesn't fully hit you until the very final stretch of the film, that of which will stay with you long after the credits roll. With the incredible vocal talents of David Thewlis, Jennifer Jason Leigh, and Tom Noonan playing literally every other character in this movie, this poignant and impeccably crafted animated feature ranks amongst not just the best of stop-motion animation, but amongst the absolute best of Charlie Kaufman's work, marking his finest hour as both writer and director. I can't put into words how much I was wrapped up in this bizarre and moving film, and I think everybody, if you haven't seen this already, should absolutely seek this one out. And that now is going to take us to number 7.
Do you remember how Alice wasn't always in Wonderland?
She fell down, down, down deep in a hole.
Right, well, I wasn't always in room. I'm like Alice. Now we've got a chance.
I'm scared.
I know.
Now, if you asked me years ago, this probably would have been about, I want to say, number 3 on this list. But as it stands, at number 7, I have Room, directed by Lenny Abramson. Using a child's POV to present one of the most horrific situations that a person would have to deal with, Room is such an engrossing film right from the very start, with every heartbreaking revelation made along the way adding so much weight and depth to the story. In this approach, the film is able to articulate so succinctly the situation happening in front of Jack's own eyes that he's only able to see and comprehend at face value. But the understanding that grows throughout the narrative is what makes his arc and this film such a compelling watch. Lenny Abramson's Room is such a brilliant portrait of the effects extreme trauma and isolation can have on an entire family, but also a deeply touching depiction of the unbreakable bond between mother and child, played so convincingly by Jacob Tremblay in one of the best child performances I've ever seen, and an Oscar-winning Brie Larson, for which this film would be nothing without. And that, guys, is going to take us to my pick for number 6.
Shaun the sheep and his flock know every trick to having a good time.
At number 6, I have the second nominee for Best Animated Feature of 2015, and that, of course, is Shaun the Sheep movie, directed by Mark Burton and Richard Starzak, of course, from Aardman Studios. And honestly, I'm really glad I rewatched this one, because when I saw this again for this list, I knew for a fact that this is one of the most rewatchable and entertaining movies I've ever seen, featuring some of the best stop-motion animation that Aardman has ever produced, and some of the most carefully constructed sight gags ever conceived. Shaun the Sheep movie shares as much DNA with the films of Charlie Chaplin as it does with the studio's previous body of work, playing out almost like a silent comedy for the majority of its runtime, while delivering one killer joke after the next. Endlessly hilarious, entertaining, inventive, and ultimately touching, the story at the center of Shaun the Sheep movie and its central characters beat loudly through the screen, making this tightly plotted joyride what I believe to be Aardman's finest achievement. Yes, even more so than all the Wallace and Gromit films. I think that this is one of those rare instances where the spin-off somehow rises above the source material from which it was derived and creates something wholly original and unique to itself, and honestly, you couldn't watch many better animated movies than Shaun the Sheep. And that, guys, is going to take us to my top 5 of the best films of 2015, kicking it off with number 5.
What do you do? You're not an engineer. You're not a designer. You can't put a hammer to a nail. I built the circuit board. The graphical interface was stolen. So how come 10 times in a day, I read Steve Jobs as a genius? What do you do?
Musicians play their instruments. I play the orchestra.
And rounding out the bottom of my top 5, I have Steve Jobs, directed by Danny Boyle. And rarely has there ever been a better pairing of writer and director than Aaron Sorkin and Danny Boyle, bringing their creative forces together and channeling that energy into what I'd argue is, for both of them, their greatest accomplishment on film. Utilizing a 3-act structure centered around 3 different press conferences throughout his life and career, the film breaks down the legacy and persona of Steve Jobs while somehow still capturing what made him a brilliant leader in the first place. Michael Fassbender is more than up for the task in bringing this larger-than-life figure to the screen with much charisma and complexity. Kate Winslet more than delivers as well in an Oscar-nominated turn as Joanna Hoffman, and the entire ensemble is one of the best ever assembled for a film like this, proving that Soren's scripts can bring out the absolute best in any actor. I mean, I don't know for the life of me how not only was Danny Boyle not nominated for director that year, but how Sorkin wasn't even nominated for screenplay. I mean, this lost a nomination to The freaking Martian?
In your face, Neil Armstrong.
I don't think the craft of the screenplay really gets much better than this. Extremely memorable, rewatchable, and rewarding, Steve Jobs is one of the few biopics that goes above and beyond in delivering a top-notch character study like no other, and undoubtedly, Steve Jobs is one of the best films from 2015. And with that one out of the way, that is going to take us to number 4. And in the number 4 slot on this list, I have the 3rd Best Animated Feature nominee from that year, and that is Boy in the World from director Alain Abreu. With an 80-minute runtime and without a single line of comprehensible dialogue to be found, Boy in the World proves itself to be the epitome of visual storytelling through the medium of animation, featuring an art style that is so simplistic yet so complex at the same time, brimming with vibrancy in almost every frame. literally from the first 10 minutes of this movie, I was utterly captivated and really might be one of the best opening 10 minutes to any film I've ever seen. Using the ever-changing industrial landscape to reflect the loss of individuality, Boy in the World tells such a personal and intimate coming-of-age story on quite the epic and mystifying scale, one that captures the awe and wonder that comes from the unadulterated beauty of nature better than any other film I can think of. There is not a single animated film I have seen that is as singular as this one, and with its warm, inviting look drawing you into the exploration of its adult themes, I find it hard for anyone not to be mesmerized, or at the very least appreciative of what was accomplished here. And that now is going to bring us into the top 3 of this list, all 3 of which I consider to be masterpieces of cinema. So let's get right into it at number 3.
Tidak, saya menganggap itu tidak besar. Bagaimana mungkin tidak besar? 1 juta orang dibunuh atau lebih. Sebenarnya dia politik.
At number 3 on this list, I have The Look of Silence from Joshua Oppenheimer, which is the follow-up to The Act of Killing, which was a documentary I loved when I saw it. And so, of course, I knew I had to see this. And also because I knew I was going to make this list at the end of the year. But besides the point, serving as a juxtaposition to the aforementioned film, The Look of Silence is a much more structured, streamlined, and humanistic companion piece to The Act of Killing. This time told from the perspective of Adi Rukun, an optician whose older brother was killed during the Indonesian genocide of 1965, that of whom he never got to meet, as opposed to being from the viewpoint of those who perpetuated the crimes. In getting the opportunity to confront many of those who were responsible for his brother's murder, The Look of Silence somehow ends up feeling even more shocking and urgent than Oppenheimer's previous film, and the justification many of these individuals have for their heinous actions is downright disturbing and maddening. I literally could not believe some of the stuff that was coming out of these people's mouths, and also a level of catharsis I don't think I have ever seen in a documentary before, and that was something that was really bold and refreshing. You see many throughout the documentary try to either rationalize or reckon with the violence that has irreversibly changed the trajectory of their lives, but if there's one thing The Look of Silence teaches us, is that the past will always stay with them, no matter how far they try to put it out of view. And look, I love Amy Winehouse as much as the next guy, but really the fact that that won over this for Best Documentary Feature is an absolute crime. Not only should this have won at the Oscars, but I think that this is, quite frankly, the greatest documentary I have ever seen in my life. And that is why The Look of Silence ends up in the number 3 spot. But wait, that's only number 3 and I'm already saying that? Well, rest assured, these next 2 are undeniable cultural and all-time classics. So without further ado, let's rip right into number 2.
And there she was. Hello, Riley.
Oh, look at you. Aren't you a little bundle of joy?
At number 2, I have Inside Out directed by none other than Pete Docter, and the last of the Best Animated Feature nominees from that year, and of course the eventual winner of that category. Unbelievable. I don't think I've ever seen a year where I've had 4 animated movies in my top 10, let alone all the Oscar nominees from that category. But this, coincidentally enough, along with my number 1 film, were the only 2 films I saw in theaters that made my top 10 of the year, which I think is saying quite something, because even though I wasn't particularly into movies at this time, I grew up with Pixar, as you know. And when I went to see this with my mom the weekend it opened, which was my birthday weekend nonetheless, even then I knew that this was a very special, one-of-a-kind film that no one but Pete Docter of Pixar could bring us. In what I consider to be the single greatest year in the history of animated feature films, the one achievement that towers above all else is this. The most recent film from Pixar Animation that I consider to be a flat-out masterpiece. The writing and execution of its premise is so concise and intricately conceived that you'd be shocked to learn that the writers of this film don't have a doctorate in psychology. The world building is so creative and all-encompassing, as are its characters, who have since gone on to become Pixar icons in their own right, especially Joy, Sadness, and Bing Bong, brought to life beautifully by Amy Poehler, Phyllis Smith, and Richard Kind, respectively. However, it's how all of this is entwined into Riley's coming-of-age story, which is one of the most moving and remarkable character arcs in any Pixar film, leading to one of the studio's most stunning finales. I still remember crying in the theater when I saw that scene when Riley comes back home. It really is an all-time great Pixar moment, as is the stuff with Bing Bong, man. Oh my. Oh. But as great as the follow-up to this film was, as well as a handful of Pixar films to come after it, I do hope one day that the studio will be able to reclaim this level of artistic success once again, because this truly is one of the studio's finest accomplishments. And that is it, guys. We are finally at the very top of the best films of 2015, and topping the list at number 1 is
I know there's things you cannot tell me, but I also know there's a story here, and I think everybody will hear about it.
Do you think your paper has the resources to take that on?
I do. Do you?
And topping the list for the best films of 2015, I have Spotlight, directed by Tom McCarthy. Now, just to give you some context, 2015 was really the first year that I started following the Academy Awards for. And so when I saw that this movie was playing in theaters, I knew I had to go to my local cinema to see it. And if you all didn't know, this was the movie that turned things around for me and really helped put everything into perspective. How to write realistic and engaging dialogue to tell a delicate and endlessly riveting story, which happened to be one of the most shocking scandals that the world has ever seen. Not only do I think every moment of Tom McCarthy and Josh Singer's Oscar-winning screenplay is perfectly written, but it also sheds a significant light on one of the most harrowing displays of complicity and guilt for all those who helped to cover up the widespread systemic abuse within the Catholic Church, featuring a terrific ensemble to bring this groundbreaking team of investigative journalists to life, particularly Mark Ruffalo as Mike Resendez. Spotlight still remains one of the most vitally important films of its era, a decade after it won Best Picture, and without question, one of the most formative films when it comes to my understanding and love of cinema. This one is one I come back to and am just riveted all over again. It really is one of my favorite movies of all time. And yeah, that's my list for the best films of 2015. I'm sorry this took so long to get out. My life has been all over the place lately, so I appreciate your patience in waiting for this to come out literally in February. But hey, you know, the 2025 list is right around the corner, and at least it's out before then. So thank you for tuning into this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you want to see more video essays like this one, I always try to plan them out, and I hope I can get another one to you very, very soon. But in the meantime, you guys take it well, and yeah, I'll talk to you all very soon.